What if the version of you that suffered the most was never truly you? There is a strange kind of liberation that doesn't feel like victory. It feels like silence. Not the silence of defeat, but the silence after a long internal war. One day without warning, you simply stop reacting. You hear the same voices, the same triggers, but they pass through you like wind. And it's in that moment, quiet, almost invisible, that something shifts. You don't recognize the person you used to be. And the strangest part, you don't miss them. That version of you who always explained, always apologized, always needed to be seen, to be understood, to be enough. They start to feel like a character from a dream you've outgrown, a role you played before you knew it was just a role. But here's the paradox. You didn't get here by force. You didn't heal by fixing yourself. You evolved the moment you stopped trying to become someone else. This isn't transformation through effort. It's transformation through surrender. You stopped feeding the illusion. You stopped negotiating with the shadow, and something deeper than effort took over. Now what you feel is that strange stillness, that distance from the old pain. It isn't emptiness, it's spaciousness. And inside that space, something sacred is beginning to breathe again. Could it be that the shadow, the hidden self built from repression and survival, has loosened its grip? And if that's true, then what lies ahead isn't a breakdown. It's not a collapse. It's the slow remembering of who you were before the world told you who to be. Maybe the real shift isn't loud. Maybe it's in the silence that settles when you stop telling your story from the wound. You begin to notice. The past no longer wraps around your identity like a second skin. The hurt you used to wear like a badge it no longer fits. The pride you once held like a shield, it feels heavy, now unnecessary. You don't deny what you lived through. You just don't carry it like proof anymore. You can still see it, every chapter, every scar. But now, it's like watching a movie you no longer feel the need to explain. The pain is real. But it's not your address. Because something in you knows you didn't come this far to keep performing your past like a script. You came to outgrow it. And when that happens, you stop speaking from survival. You start speaking from understanding. You don't have to justify who you've become. You just embody it. No resistance, no performance, just quiet alignment. You realize your past doesn't need to be retold in every conversation. It's no longer your anchor, it's your soil. And from that soil, something new has begun to grow. A quiet, unshakable freedom. One that doesn't need permission, one that doesn't seek applause. Because you're no longer trying to be heard. You've learned to listen to yourself. And in that deep listening, you've made peace with where you've been and opened space for who you're finally becoming. And once your past stops defining you, you begin to feel something else shifting, not loudly, but quietly, deeply, like the soft cracking of old roots beneath the soil. You realize the change isn't in what you believe, it's in how you respond. The triggers that once set your whole nervous system on fire barely flicker now, not because you've numbed out, but because you've outgrown the need to defend what no longer feels like you. That tight reflex to prove, to protect, to predict, it loosens. The old patterns, the ones that wrapped themselves around your identity, start to fall away, not with a fight, but with disinterest. You don't react from the wound anymore. You respond from presence. The urgency to fix or control dissolves. And in its place, a quiet breath, a sacred pause, a moment where your soul chooses instead of your fear. This is when you know the voice that used to scream for safety has gone still. And another voice, deeper, softer, more ancient, has begun to speak. You don't need to analyze everything now. You feel your way through. You discern. You allow. Because healing isn't about becoming perfect. It's about remembering what it feels like to be real. And in those small, quiet moments, when you choose stillness over reaction, acceptance over resistance, awareness over habit, you realize something profound. You've stopped fighting your shadow. You've started listening to your soul. And as those old reactions fade, you begin to sense something else emerging, something softer, something unmistakably real. You start to feel at home in your own skin, not because you've fixed yourself, but because you've stopped abandoning yourself. You no longer need to be impressive. You no longer need to be right. You realize your soul never needed a costume to be worthy. It only needed space. So you let go of the versions of you that were built to be liked, to be accepted, to be enough. You stop shrinking to fit into conversations that don't feel alive. You stop twisting yourself to stay in spaces that feel too small for your truth. And something incredible happens. You no longer fear being misunderstood, because you no longer depend on being seen to feel real. Your strength no longer comes from how tightly you can hold on. It comes from how gently you can release. And it's in that gentleness you begin to live from a different place, not from image, not from obligation, but from essence. You speak less, but say more. You show up without needing to prove anything, because your presence now carries the weight your performance once tried to achieve. This is what it means to live from your true self, not to become something, but to finally stop pretending you're not already whole. And in this space, you begin to realize you were never lost. You were simply layered. And now, with every false self you let fall away, you're not changing. You're remembering. And when you begin living from your true self, your relationships begin to change too. Not because you've made a decision to cut people off, but because you've stopped cutting parts of yourself to keep them. You no longer chase what doesn't feel aligned. You no longer negotiate your worth just to feel wanted. Because now you see what you once called love was often just fear wearing perfume. You used to seek people who would reflect back who you hoped to be. Now, you look for windows that help you see more of who you already are. And when that shift happens, certain connections start to dissolve. Not in anger, not in drama, just in quiet, mutual release. You don't resist it, you honor it. Because something in you knows what is real will never require you to shrink. And what asks you to abandon yourself was never love in the first place. You stop performing in conversations. You stop bargaining your presence for attention. You don't need to be understood to feel seen, because now you see yourself, clearly, fully, finally. And from that place of fullness, you stop attracting people who resonate with your wounds and begin drawing those who resonate with your wholeness. Not out of need, but out of recognition. You no longer connect to complete a part of you. You connect to celebrate what's already whole. And that is the deepest intimacy. There is not two people trying to save each other, but two souls meeting with nothing to prove, nothing to fix, and nothing to hide. And when you stop seeking from lack, you stop choosing from fear. There's a stillness now, a space between the impulse and the decision. And in that space, you no longer move out of desperation. You've felt the cost of chasing what was never meant for you. You've tasted the loneliness of staying where your soul couldn't breathe. So now, you pause. You wait. You listen. You no longer say yes just to avoid being alone. You no longer run toward what sparkles when it doesn't feel safe. Because you've learned urgency is rarely intuition. It's often just an echo of the old wound saying, hurry, or you'll be left behind. But you're not rushing anymore. You're rooted. Rooted in the knowing that nothing real can be forced. That peace doesn't come from being chosen. It comes from choosing differently. You begin to honor the weight of your decisions, not with fear, but with reverence. You'd rather walk alone in truth than sit comfortably in a lie. You no longer fear the silence, because silence has never betrayed you. It's where you learned the difference between longing and settling, between survival and alignment. And now your choices are no longer strategies. They're declarations. Declarations that you will no longer betray yourself just to feel wanted. And that shift, that simple but sacred shift, changes everything. Because when fear stops driving, the soul begins to lead. And as fear loosens its grip on your choices, you begin to see even more clearly some people aren't meant to walk this path with you. Not because they're bad, not because you've outgrown them in pride, but because they've chosen to stay where your soul can no longer return. You stop absorbing what isn't yours. You stop carrying pain you didn't create. Because now you understand not all suffering is your responsibility to heal. Not all brokenness is waiting for your touch. You used to believe love meant sacrifice. That to care deeply was to pour yourself out even when no one asked you to. But that was never love. That was the ache of needing to be needed. You mistook your light for a bandage. You confused your empathy with duty. And so you gave, and leaked your own essence trying to mend people who weren't ready to hold themselves. But now, you see clearly. Healing cannot be forced. Transformation cannot be gifted. And love. True love does not require self-abandonment. You stop playing the savior. You stop bending to make others feel whole. Because now you know you were never meant to be the answer to someone else's silence. Some will stay behind. Some will misunderstand your peace as distance. Some will call your boundaries cold. But you don't explain anymore. You don't justify your path. You simply keep walking, not out of cruelty, but out of clarity. Because this is not abandonment. This is alignment. And your soul, it finally knows the difference. And once you stop trying to fix what resists healing, something softer begins to rise. You no longer need to prove that you've changed. You no longer need to explain how far you've come. You stop performing transformation, because now you simply are. You don't chase applause anymore. You don't measure your growth by how loudly the world responds. The soul doesn't shout. It doesn't seek validation. It just is quiet, constant, clear. You walk into rooms without shrinking, without adjusting your light to protect someone else's comfort. You no longer trade your truth for approval. You no longer abandon yourself to be accepted. Because now you understand Your energy speaks louder than your words ever could. Your presence carries the quiet weight of someone who no longer needs to be seen, to know they're real. And in that silence, something profound happens. You begin to trust yourself, not the version of you that performs, but the part that just listens. Listens without defense, without fear, without ego. Because the soul doesn't argue, it remembers, and now, so do you. And as the ego quotes, so does the noise around you. Your life no longer runs on urgency, no longer spins on the axis of drama or reaction. There's a deeper rhythm now, not dictated by what's loud, but by what's true. You've learned to pause before speaking, to breathe before deciding, to listen before assuming. There is space now, space between stimulus and response, space between fear and choice. And in that space, you don't need answers to feel safe. You don't need to control the path ahead to trust the step you're on. You've stopped chasing certainty. You've started moving from alignment. Your decisions no longer echo your anxiety. They reflect your center. And what no longer matches that center no longer holds weight. It doesn't need to be forced away. It simply dissolves, like dust on a wind that no longer blows in your direction. This is energetic maturity, not in how loud you speak, but in how calmly you walk away, not in how much you know, but in how little you resist. Because now your peace is not conditional, it's structural. It's built into the architecture of who you've become. And from this inner order, life begins to rearrange itself, not because you push harder, but because you resist less. And as your life begins to move from inner order, your definition of success quietly changes. It's no longer about how many people are watching, or how loudly the world applauds. Success no longer looks like visibility. It looks like peace. It's the calm you feel when no one's around. It's the ease in your chest when you wake up and realize you're not chasing anything today. You've stopped trying to become someone. You've started to inhabit who you already are. The version of you that once performed, that hustled for validation, that bent toward every standard but your own, that version no longer leads. Now you move from presence, quiet, rooted, unapologetically still. You measure growth in how quickly you forgive, how often you pause, how gently you let go of what no longer resonates. You don't need to post every evolution. You don't need to explain your silence. You've realized not every chapter is meant to be seen. Some of your most sacred growth happens in the dark, unwitnessed by the world, but fully known by your soul. And that is enough. Because when you live from presence, you no longer need performance. You become the proof of your own becoming. And once you begin inhabiting presence, you realize you no longer live to be someone. You live to be, fully, quietly, honestly. The mask falls, not in a dramatic tear, but in a soft, natural shedding, like a leaf that knows when its season is over. You stop curating yourself to be digestible. You stop editing your soul to fit a role. There's no longer a need to impress, no urge to be understood by those who were never meant to hear you. Because now your essence speaks. Without decoration, without defense, you no longer enter rooms seeking recognition. Your presence is no longer a performance. It's an anchor. It doesn't plead to be seen. It simply is. And that being, that quiet, unshakable being, shifts the entire atmosphere. You've stopped trading your truth for belonging, stopped using visibility as proof of value. You've remembered something sacred. Your worth is not in how others respond. It's in how honestly you live. And when you live from essence, image becomes irrelevant. You don't need to be known. You need to be real. You don't shine to be noticed. You shine because it's your nature. And perhaps none of this, the stillness, the peace, the presence could exist without this one sacred act. You turned inward. You faced the part of you most people spend their lives avoiding. The part buried in silence, dressed in shame, shaped by fear. Carl Jung once said enlightenment does not come from imagining figures of light, but from making the darkness conscious. And you've done that. Not with pride, not with drama, but with trembling honesty. You looked your shadow in the eye, not to defeat it, but to understand it. Not to banish it, but to bring it home. You didn't silence your pain. You listened to it. You didn't reject your fears. You let them speak. And what you found wasn't evil. It wasn't a weakness. It was the unprocessed grief of a self that once had no choice but to survive. You held it. You named it. And slowly, you integrated it. You stopped pretending that healing was light and easy. You embraced the truth that real healing is messy, raw, and often begins in the dark. But now, the dark no longer owns you. You've stopped flinching from your past. Stop fearing your inner storms, because your shadow, it doesn't dim your light. It defines it. Now your fear is no longer a cage. It's a compass. Your past is no longer a trap. It's a teacher. And the parts of you that once felt broken, they've become the roots of your wisdom. This is what it means to integrate, to awaken, not to escape the self, but to finally become whole within it. You're no longer reacting to life, you're responding to truth. No longer performing a version of yourself that was shaped by wounds. You've stopped chasing healing like a destination, because you've remembered you were never broken, only buried. You've released the need to be understood, to be chosen, to be anything other than real. Now your life is not a performance, it's a presence. Not a proving, but a return. To essence. To soul. To self. Carl Jung said enlightenment is not imagining figures of light, but making the darkness conscious. And you've done exactly that. You faced the shadow, hold it with grace, and walked through it not to escape, but to reclaim. Now, you don't need the world to understand you, because your energy speaks what words never could. Your silence has become a sanctuary. Your stillness strength. You're no longer becoming. You're remembering. And in that remembering, you've returned. Not to perfection, but to wholeness. And that changes everything. If you like this video, let me know by commenting below what you think. Click the subscribe button to follow the next journey of the channel. Echo Thoughts. Thank you for taking the time to watch the whole video. See you in the next videos.